everybody. My name is Marta Gutman. I'm the Dean of the Spitzer School of Architecture, the premier public school of architecture in New York City. This morning, it's my great privilege to welcome you to this international virtual symposium organized by Cassim Shepard in conjunction with the exhibit Mass Support, Flexibility, and Resident Agency in Housing that's on view in the Spitzer School's Atrium Gallery. As is our wont, I'll begin by acknowledging that the Spitzer School of Architecture, grounded on the schist bedrock outcrop of Haarlem, is situated upon the ancestral homeland and territory of the Munsee Lenape, Wappinger, and Wequassacek peoples. As members of an educational community, we are obliged to know the histories of dispossession that have allowed the City College of New York to grow and thrive on this vibrant terrain. As designers and thinkers, we endeavor to build in ways that lead toward justice, and we are committed to working to dismantling the ongoing consequences of settler colonialism. So in that vein, this symposium is welcome. Mass Support supports the legacy and contemporary relevance of the Stichting Architecten Research, SAR, and excuse my Dutch, a Dutch architectural think tank active between 1964 and 1990 that proposed a radical new way of thinking about mass housing, one that fused the efficiency of industrial construction with the flexibility of user customization. Initially led by John Houbraken, the SAR suggested new functions for the construction industry, for households, and crucially for architects. Today, an impressive array of speakers will address flexibility, resident input, and modular building in contemporary residential architecture. The symposium will complement and extend the exhibition's themes, exposing the audience who consists of students, academics, policymakers, and practitioners to the under-examined interface of robust community engagement and innovative construction technology. I look forward to their insights on these important questions. What can resident control enable politically? What can modular construction enable architecturally? And what can flexibility enable at the neighborhood scale? So I'd like to close by offering some thank yous and recognition of that the exhibition and symposium are the products of a unique collaboration between the Spitzer School of Architecture here at City College, the Architectural League of New York, and the Curatorial Research Collective of the TUE with support of the Consulate General of the Netherlands in New York. So thank yous to Dutch Culture USA, a program of the Consulate General of the Netherlands here in New York City, the Architectural League, especially its extraordinary director, Rosalie Genevro, and the Curatorial Research Collective of TU Eindhoven, which curated the exhibition. Houbraken taught for decades at this school, and the spirit of his inquiry endures along with his commitment to architecture as a social endeavor. And last but not least, I extend my thanks to the staff, students, and faculty of the Spitzer School, no one more so than Cassim Shepard. The room is yours. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Martha, and thank you all so much for being here. This is really, truly an incredible group of people, both the attendees and the panelists. As Martha said, this is a really wonderful opportunity to extend the themes of this exhibition, which we've been so excited to be able to host here at the Spitzer School of Architecture. And that is the work of many, many, many people, chief among them my colleagues in the Curatorial Research Collective, some of whom you'll hear from in a moment, who have tirelessly worked to bring together this exhibition that started out by exploring a deep dive into the archives to explore the legacy of the SAR and of its founding director, John Houbraken. A huge inspiration to me, a really wonderful episode in history. But then as the more and more we got into it, we realized the extent to which a lot of the themes that were most important to the SAR and to Abraken, those of flexibility and resident agency primary among them, were themes that really resonated with this contemporary moment of crisis. We need a lot of new solutions to the international housing crisis, but we also need to revisit overlooked or discarded strategies from our recent past. And it's in that spirit that the work of John Abraken and the SAR offers some, I think, useful pathways for a range of seemingly contradictory imperatives. For example, how do we balance a commitment to self-determination, the self-determination of residents, with the need to build more housing units quickly and economically? How can we leverage a detailed understanding and a detailed reading of the minutiae of things like zoning and building codes in the service of really bold, ambitious visions to reshape the built fabric of our cities and our suburbs? How can we utilize sustained observation of demographic change and household diversity to inform concrete design proposals for housing that empowers its users, that overcomes political and financial inertia, and that anticipates change? So I'm really pleased to engage into a conversation about that. We have three really excellent panels today. The first will think about sort of new organizational forms for housing, resident-led housing that incorporates flexibility, as well as the agency of residents in really interesting and innovative ways. The second will explore prefabricated and modular construction technology and how you can think about that as a way of enabling flexibility and resident agency, especially if you reframe the question of what kind of problems is prefab or modular trying to solve. Then we'll have a quick break, and then at 2 p.m., please come back for a really blockbuster panel on suburban fabric, kind of opening up the scale a little bit to thinking about how can we think about flexibility, how can we think about the self-determination of not only individual users of units, but also neighborhoods and communities when it comes to really thinking about understanding what are the roadblocks to encouraging greater flexibility in this moment where we do need to come up with a whole bunch of new settlement patterns and a whole bunch of new ways of thinking about suburban fabric. But to give you guys a little bit of history, I hope those of you who are in New York are able to come and see the exhibition in the gallery at the Spitzer School if you haven't already. For those of you who are not, I will include in the recordings of this event some really excellent photography of the exhibition, but it's no substitute for the real thing. But we did want to kind of ground this conversation in a little bit of the historical context that SAR and Abraken were working in, and hopefully that will illuminate some of the resonances between the different contemporary practices that we'll hear from. So I'd love to invite my colleague and doctoral supervisor, Sergio Figueiredo, who is the convener of the Curatorial Research Collective and a really fascinating expert, not just in architecture, but in architecture culture, how architecture communicates at various moments in time through institutions, through publications, and most of all through exhibitions. Some of the concerns that the field and the discipline at large are most invested in, as well as broader issues of social concern outside of architecture that are interpreted through an architectural lens. Sergio, as an expert in architecture culture, and specifically in the role and evolution of architectural institutions in the Netherlands, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit, everyone assembled here today, about how the SAR fits into what was happening to Dutch housing in the couple of decades after the end of World War II. What role were architects playing in this moment that was super transitional for the Dutch built environment? And how did the SAR sort of fit into that?
Yeah, Cassim, hi. Hello, everyone as well. Thank you for having me. That is, I would say, an excellent question, but also a fundamental question, because in many ways, the SAR and Abraken's own thinking is in many ways a product of its time. So basically in the Netherlands, in the post-war period in general, but particularly in the late 1960s, there was an enormous change experienced in Dutch society. So there was an economic change, there was a new economic prosperity in the Netherlands, which was fueled not only by post-war economic recovery, but also by the discovery of new gas fields in the Groningen area, so in the north of the country. Coupled with that, there were also social and demographic changes at the same time. So there were new influx of immigrants from different countries. So from Suriname, from Morocco, from Spain, from the Antilles. And with this influx of new inhabitants, there were also new expectations for how to live. Also, even new ways of families, like there were different types of families that were not necessarily predominant in the Netherlands at the time. However, it is also important to contrast that, this sort of bold new change that was happening in Dutch society with what had happened in post-war reconstruction. So in the aftermath of the war, there was an enormous reconstruction campaign which was initiated with the aim to build about 1 million homes or 1 million dwellings within more or less a decade. So the emphasis in this reconstruction campaign was obviously quantity in order to respond very quickly and very, let's say, as efficiently as possible to housing shortages. Therefore, the Dutch government had decreed that the financing of housing projects in the Netherlands was going to be dependent on how well these housing projects fulfilled certain expectations, particularly those that had been prescribed in a law from 1951, which was called the Prescriptions and Hints for Housing, which meant that, in fact, there was a bit of uniformity that had been created because they all were fulfilling to the same functional requirements. Not only that, but they were being built in a massive scale. I prepared a few images, so
Yeah,
I'm
please
just
share
going
them.
to share my screen just for a little bit. Yes. So, for example, what you can see here, this is the typical 1950s type of urban development in the Netherlands, which is even has a Dutch name, which is called stamp urbanism, which basically means developing one unit that then it gets stamped all over the place. So there's an inherent repetition to it. And with it, of course, great uniformity, right? This was also, let's say, supercharged in the early 1960s when the housing minister at the time, still intent on sort of counteracting the housing shortage that was still acute by then, not only attempted to stimulate housing production, but also to encourage industrialized building techniques. Again, this created a lot of uniformity in the built environment. Oops, a little bit too far. This created a lot of uniformity in the built environment because it's really supported and fostered this sort of large-scale approach. And this was developed in new suburbs, and this is the Bijlmermeer project, which at the time was a suburb of Amsterdam, so in new projects, but also in renovation projects for inner cities, which meant that all in all, it meant that the block of gallery flats became the dominant form of housing in the Netherlands very quickly. So the consequence of these big building projects of system buildings and other rationalizations of the building process was, in fact, the creation of a rather monotonous urban fabric, primarily in the suburbs, but also increasingly so in the inner cities, with almost the same block of flats and almost the same terraced houses everywhere in the Netherlands being more or less the same. So this has been identified by some critics in the Netherlands as an urban environment that was seemingly lifeless, monotonous, and where very little attention was paid to the user or the inhabitant. Now, the SAR, as will become apparent, I suppose, during the not only this period of introduction, but also during the talks that will be subsequent to this, the SAR was actually appeared as a response to that. It had a practical component to it, which was actually the realization by some architects in the Netherlands that by following an industrialized building process, the architect was losing its position within the building process itself. So there was a big concern that construction companies were taking the leads in developing and shaping the built environment in the Netherlands. But there was also this concern about reconnecting what Haverken would claim in his 1961 book, the supports and infills, reconnect man and its environment. This was, I have to say that this was also something that was already appearing in the Dutch architectural circles, particularly with the establishment of, or not the establishment, but the institution or the appointment of a new editorial board at the magazine Forum, an editorial board that included the Dutch members of Team 10, so people like Jaap Bakema, but also Aldo van Eyck, and also a young Herman Hertzberger. And when just to get a sense of how there was a changing tides in the perception of the built environment, at this period, in the first issue of this new editorial board, they titled the issue "Another Idea," and the idea was precisely similar to what Haverkamp would claim in '61, so a couple of years later, which was to connect or reestablish the relationship between man and the environment, which according to the editorial board had been, let's say, thrown off balance by bureaucratic and technocratic forces. So this is where the SAR emerges in this context of change, social, demographic, economic change in the Netherlands, but also, let's say, a building landscape that has been entirely dominated by industrialized techniques. What is also important to understand about the SAR is that while they were very much aiming to develop a type of variation and a type of participation of users into the design and the building process, they wanted to do this by associating with the building industry. So basically, there was a backlash at this moment that there had been an enormous focus on quantity, and then the focus should now be on quality. But what the SAR was proposing was that you didn't have to focus on one at the expense of the other. So why not focus on quality while also focus on quantity, and therefore engage directly with the building practices?
Yeah, and I think what's so interesting about the refusal of that binary between quantity or quality was really the notion that what really had to be at root was not so much a different kind of architectural quality in terms of finished form, but really trying to reintroduce the agency of the user to restore what Bracken referred to as the natural relationship between an occupant and their dwelling. In terms of his own personal biography, I had the great honor of interviewing him in his home last year, actually a year ago this week, and he described in great detail how one of his earliest influences was actually growing up in Java, in what is now Indonesia, where he lived the first 20 years of his life, and being deeply influenced by observing the kampong in the part of Java near Bandung where he grew up. Self-built housing by residents using generational knowledge that met all of their needs. And then when his family moved to the Netherlands, he too sort of, even though he was ethnically Dutch, an immigrant in that huge wave as well, being confronted with the landscape you describe and really having it not make much sense, this notion of a complete lack of control or agency on the part of residents, especially given that demographic context of a diversity of different household types, but a supply from these industrial solutions for housing of a very homogeneous series of building types.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
so I think that also the refusal. I mean, you mentioned some of the context of other people in architecture at the time thinking about flexibility, thinking about agency. But what I find really almost unique about the SAR's approach to this was the refusal to be either, boutique one-offs or something that was utopian. A desire to really work with and leverage the possibilities of industrial construction to recognize the reality of the need for this huge increase in supply, but never to sacrifice that self-determination on the part of residents to be part of a consultative process in thinking about what exactly their space needs were, and then how to think about how to design for those things that you can't necessarily anticipate. And this is a theme that runs through so much of his work and writing. I'm pleased to remind everyone that a new book of his short works has recently has just come out, edited by John Dale and Stephen Kendall. Stephen Kendall, a lifelong mentee and friend and collaborator of John Bracken's. So the work continues to live on in its text form, but it also continues to resonate, I think, with a lot of things that we're seeing in terms of new strategies for addressing the housing emergency that we find ourselves in today.
Yes, of course. I mean, that's all true, of course. And you see that and you recognize that precisely in the 1961 book, Supports and Infills, which originally was called Supports and Mensen in the Dutch version, The End of Mass Housing.
Supports and People. It was, yeah.
Supports and Peoples, and Mensen is people in Dutch, sorry. Supports and People. And this diagram actually alludes to it quite nicely, which is one of the things that he proposed in that book, or perhaps the most significant element that he proposed in that book, was this entire separation between supports and infills. And supports not being only defined as, let's say, structural elements in a building, but being the community supported elements of a building, of which then individuals could have their own agency in regards to their own living environments. So this would be initially set up by consultations with architects. Actually, in fact, in that book, he doesn't specify this, but this is what we know from the SAR's processes and techniques, as in basically applying his concept to the standard design and building practices of the Netherlands, or attempting to. So having consultation with architects, developing their own individual layouts. So basically using the rigidity of supports to create a flexibility for the infills. There were two moments for that. One was the original moment in which the infills would be created precisely in accordance to the tastes and preferences and ideas and needs of users and inhabitants. And then on a second level, once those inhabitants would decide to change their homes, they could do so very easily with prefabricated infill packages, they were called. So provided by industry, so industrially produced and available for purchase, they could just change their home at will without the need to involve any type of specialist in that process. So the SAR actually becomes this sort of, becomes a way to attempt to realize the ideas that were entirely conceptual in the book that Habermas put forward in '61. And it is also touching upon the point that you were making, that it didn't want to be a one-off, right? It wasn't about trying to create one particular building, but it was really about trying to influence and shape the ways in which the building process would be developed. I mean, this is anecdotal, but for example, this image that I'm showing you now does not come from this, this book from Habermas, because he refused to introduce any type of imageries into the book so that people would not be fixated or focused on one particular formal expression. He was very concerned in presenting the idea as an idea and allowing others to then give form to it. And that is also how it ended up with the SAR. So the SAR as a research office, or let's say the SAR as a foundation that had a research office, the research office was not particularly concerned with formal expressions as much as it was in establishing methodologies and establishing policies and approaches that could be and should be, in fact, according to them, should be used by any architect in the Netherlands. So instead of designing something, they determined that it would be much better to develop the systems through which something can be designed, in which there is user consultation and there is the leverage of industrial processes.
Absolutely. And I think, that's such an important point, because they weren't, designing for not only formal expression, they were also not designing for something to be finished, right? It was about advancing specific methodologies that could reintroduce a sense of agency on the part of residents into determining what is the configuration that makes the most sense for that particular household. And I think sometimes when those who do remember the SAR think about it in terms of the technical solution that was advanced, but I think it's always important to remember that what's at this root is not necessarily the technical solution, but this deep desire, this refusal to remove the agency of users from that decision-making process. Who decides when about what? How can we design now for uses and different program requirements that we can't possibly anticipate? I love this image, which sort of demonstrates some of the different ways in which they design processes for user consultation with residents who might have different kinds of household arrangements and different kinds of family structures, different kinds of needs for their space. And that emphasis on the diversity of different household types and how you can sort of create systems to deeply observe how people use space and use that to inform how you can create systems that can change over time, I think it's something that really resonates today. They also were very involved in informing pedagogy. As was mentioned, one initial home, both for Bracken as a professor and teacher and curriculum builder, and also for the SAR and their experimental approach to sort of designing these processes, was at the TUE, the Eindhoven University of Technology. and one of the many sort of interesting architects who's continuing to interpret and reinterpret and think about the lasting influence of these ideas is Tom Frantzen, who studied at the TUE after John Bracken had left and had moved to chair the architecture faculty at MIT in 1975. But some of the legacy, I think, of these pedagogical focus on levels, on hierarchy, on thinking about dimensions as the interface between design and construction and users, continue to remain as part of the pedagogy, and continues to be something that I think a lot of designers, especially those involved in the open building network, which maybe Tom will mention, continue to innovate on. So Tom started his career after graduating from TUE in 1995, and since then, his award-winning office, Frantzen et al., has completed a number of buildings. But in 2009, he added a new hyphen to his identity in founding Lemniskade projects, together with building manager Klaus Osserin, to develop architectural projects from initiative to completion as an architect and as a developer. So I'm very pleased to invite Tom to share with us a little bit of his approach to open building, the legacy of both this educational parameters that were established at the TUE, but also the lasting influence of Bracken on Dutch architecture, and how his views on these learnings have changed as his career has evolved. So welcome, Tom. Please share with us.
Thank you. It's nice to be here in this symposium. And to be honest, when I studied in Eindhoven, I wasn't very much interested in the SAR. It was seen by my fellow students as a little bit boring. So it only came up later in my career again. And when I shift to the now, we see that we are at the same task as Bracken was in the 60s. We are supposed to build almost 1 million new homes in the next decade. And the Netherlands is a small country, highly densely populated. And we have a large carbon footprint and a large nitrogen problem. Our nature reserves are in a very bad state, and it doesn't allow us to build as quickly as we want. But our government really focuses on speed. And therefore, there was a recent report, Residential Housing Within Ecological Constraints, about the use of resources, carbon footprint, and the environmental impact, to see if there could be other issues addressed other than speed. And it was done by a couple of sustainability consulting companies and a couple of local governments. And they identified 5 or actually 6 different strategies to do so. And being the first strategy, a zero strategy, a better use of the existing housing stock. We have a lot of people in the Netherlands that live in houses or apartments that are simply too big for the size of their family. We have a lot of elderly people living in terraced housing with the upper floors that are totally not used. But that wasn't within the capacity of these sustainability consulting firms. So they addressed 5 strategies, of which the first one is to top up and transform existing buildings. And then, of course, there are a few: to build smaller, to have a more intensive use of recycled materials, to build with bio-based materials, and as the last one, to have intensify industrial production of housing, which is, in my opinion, inspired by a strong lobby of the building industry, because industrial production of housing is still, in that sense, you can still sell products over and over again, which is, of course, the main objective of a building industry. But For us, for the new open building network in the Netherlands, the first strategy to top up and transform existing buildings, it nearly was the same as our mission statement to design open buildings that are designed for maximum lifespan and an unknown future reuse. So we want to design buildings that can be modified in the future according to future needs. And it is a pleasure to see that it is recognized as the main solution to build within ecological constraints. We have 14 founding partners, and in 2021 we rewrote a manifesto, which of course also incorporates John Houbraken as the legacy of John Houbraken. And we identified a few research teams, especially the business cases and building in timber. The business case being very important because normal developers weren't interested in open buildings because they simply thought they were too expensive. And to show that it wasn't, we had our case studies that were mostly actually built to show that it is possible to build open buildings. We also identified our concept, and here you also see the sharing layers of Stuart Brand. And we developed an evaluation criteria, which are more stimulative. So and we would like to build buildings in a very flexible and maximum flexible level. And we did so in the Buiksloterham in the north of Amsterdam. These are all buildings, oh, I'm being cold. These are all buildings in the north of Amsterdam and all built by architects of the open building community. And in this area, I built two buildings, Patch 22 and Top Up. And as Cassim explained, to do so, it was necessary to start a separate firm, a development company. And for us, open building means that there should be no obstacles for future changes. So in a technical sense, there should be no load-bearing walls, no shafts inside the apartments, all utilities and hollow floors, no electricity, water and heat meters inside the apartments. And also very important, there should be no legal restrictions for alternative future use. This is the floor plan of Patch 22, in which you can see that it is a totally open floor plan with the meters inside a central, inside a shaft in the central core, and enough sloping angle through the floor to be able to set up a toilet in the outmost corner of this building. It is also possible to divide this building into maximum 48 apartments. And there are also a maximum of 48 legal units in the division deed, which is very important that once you build an open building, an adaptable, flexible building technically, you should also be allowed to use it flexible in the future. And this is done in all the legal contracts that are involved. We designed hollow floors in which you have all the piping and all the drains. And this is what it actually looks like when an apartment is almost finished for our buyers to enter their homes. Our buyers could install all their drains and insulations themselves in the floors, and then put on a top floor, and then start with their infill. And to get back to the article that Cassim wrote, Mass Support, it says for Houbraken, the distinction between the base building support and the fit out, the infill, is primarily one of control and design and only secondary technically. So that demands that the return of consultation and involvement on the part of the users in the most literal sense must be accepted. And I think that is exactly what we did, and we sort of reinvented the wheel, because we were not familiar with the ideas of Habraken, but we started to recognize them again in what we were doing. And it is funny that we were almost doing exactly the same. We have built models with removable building parts in which users, under the guidance of architects, could simply try out floor plan layouts in the units that we designed. In patch 22, of course, to show the possibilities of such a building, we designed a lot of floor plan examples. But it is funny to see that none of those floor plan examples was actually built. In the final building, we had 21 owners, 26 apartments, and none of them used one of the example floor plans. Because when it's possible for people to design their own homes, they become far more specific than the scenario thinking that we as architects can do. So I will just show you a couple of images of the different apartments that were the result. And he's very happy with his apartment. In this apartment, children learn to cycle inside. It's even possible to make a vertical connection between the units. And what we never thought of, but people started to install bathtubs in their loggia balconies. And this is the only floor plan that I will show in detail, because this is a floor plan that, as an architect, you could never think of, almost. And it has a style that I totally hate stylistically. But I love the fact that it's possible, that it's in the building, that this woman who created her own environment by flying to Morocco, buying wooden doors, going to Spain to find her floor tiling, and to really customize her own living environment. So, and this is all collected in one collective building, patch 22, which has a strong identity. And I think that is very important, that a collective building has an architectural address and doesn't show the individuality of the buildings. This can be done in terraced housing, I think, but not in an apartment building. And we were very lucky that next door, we were able to buy the plot next door. And on this plot, there was a former industrial building that we could simply top up, just as was mentioned in the report, as an important strategy to stay within the ecological constraints of building. So we kept these round concrete walls, and on top of it, we installed a new timber building, which again, like patch 22, is a totally open floor plan. And this time we we showed a lot of example floor plans, and again, none of them were built. In the end, the floor plan was divided up into 4 apartments mostly, and it is very important that all these meters, they are inside the communal core, and this is then what that looks like. So this is a technical solution, and this is what it looked like when people got the keys to their apartment. So they could connect to all these openings and drains and the other supplies. So in this, this is really what it looked like when they stepped in after they bought the apartments. And then they were obliged to build a raised floor in which they could install their own installations. And to do so, we designed a manual, like an IKEA manual. We showed how to do this. And instead of addressing an infill industry, we designed it to be built by easy-to-use do-it-yourself tools. So you only needed a saw and a screwdriver to build this floor and to start your own interior. In quick, this is how it looked like. So here come all the drains and installations. Then veneer on top of it. Then cement-based panels in which radiant heating is installed. And again, people started installing bathtubs on top of their balconies. And instead of having the bedroom next to the window, they installed, for example, their showers and bathrooms next to the facade. Again, a few images to show the individualization of these apartments. And of course, this is all high-end. This is not affordable housing. But like when Tesla started with the Model S, if you want to sell sustainability, at first you have to sell it to people that can afford it. So that is also the case with adaptability. And in this way, we had two buildings built in the north of Amsterdam, and I think this is the state-of-the-art open building at this moment in the Netherlands. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tom. I think that really gives us really provides a really excellent context and grounding, both in how these ideas of open building continue to live on, but also how they continue to be reinterpreted. And whether or not one is directly aware of the provenance of some of these ideas, there are things that are baked into the DNA of a lot of the education that I know that you received, and hopefully will continue to be a feature of architectural pedagogy going forward, thinking about flexibility, not just in terms of an exclusive focus on user agency, but also in terms of things like environmental performance, in terms of things like a circular economy of labor, where you can hire the guy down the street if you want to change something, as opposed to having to call in the large contractor who made those beautiful finished forms in the exterior of the building. So thank you so much. And I think your final point is a really important segue to our first panel. That yes, of course, a lot of really interesting innovation happens at the high end. There's also a lot of really interesting new forms of thinking about flexibility and its importance, and how that can manifest itself architecturally through examples of co-housing and social housing. So in our first panel was the presentations of projects, all of which are on display in our exhibit, which also has the same name as the article, Mass Support. Thank you for shouting out the article that I've recently published about John Bracken. I should clarify that that particular quote is actually me quoting Doreen van Hoogstraten in a book called Housing for the Millions, edited by Guus Bosma, which is sort of the definitive work on the oeuvre of John Bracken and the SAR, and was a great inspiration to all of us. But again, these ideas exist and continue to be in so many different forms, textually, as well as showing up in different forms of building technology. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to now introduce the moderator of our first panel, Susanne Schindler, an architect and historian who's deeply invested in how architecture and non-design themes like finance and regulation affect housing environments. Ideas that are very near and dear to my own heart. Susanne and I have a lot in common in exploring how non-design and design issues interact and show up in the built environment. She has a professional degree in architecture from Berlin University of the Arts and a PhD from ETH in Zurich. where she currently directs the program in History and Theory of Architecture, while also serving as the design critic at the Graduate School of Design at Harvard, where she's taught urbanism alongside having taught at Columbia Graduate School of Architecture, Planning and Preservation, MIT, the New School, and others. Suzanne, please join us, and we're so excited to have you here. And please, I look forward to a conversation after some really wonderful presentations from our three panelists. Take it away, Suzanne.
Good morning or good afternoon to everybody, depending on where you are. I'm very happy to be moderating three fantastic projects and practices. I'm going to introduce the three speakers now. We're going to present in chronological order of when the projects were completed. So first is going to be Christoph Heinemann. He's an architect and founding partner of ifau, Institute for Applied Urbanism in Berlin, which is an interdisciplinary group of architects working on a range of participatory urban design and architectural projects. Christoph has taught at various universities, and R50, which he will be presenting, was completed in 2013 in Berlin. Following Christoph, we will hear from Cristina Gamboa, who's an architect in Barcelona and co-founder of Lacol, a cooperative of architects, established in 2014. Cristina teaches in London at the AA and in Barcelona at ETSAB. And third presenter will be Juliane Greb. She's an architect and founding partner of a practice called, in her name, Büro Juliane Greb, and it has two offices, one in Ghent, Belgium, and one in Cologne, Germany. And she is co-curator of this year's German pavilion in Venice at the Architecture Biennale with an intervention called Open for Maintenance. And the project she will be presenting was completed in 2020 in Munich. So I'm going to hand off to Christoph. You each have 15 minutes to present, and then I'll start with a few questions, a conversation, and also open it up to the public. So thank you so much. And I'll give you a time warning in the chat, or I'll just turn my face back on.
Okay, thank you, Suzanne. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you.
That's great. I will go to the Vollbildmodus. So you can see the slides, I hope. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, we can see the slides. Perfect.
So, as Susanne already said, I will present a project we started we initiated it in 2010 and completed it in 2013. It's a project, a co-housing project in Berlin. You can see the axonomic drawing there, showing the base with the common spaces and the concrete structure with the floors and the roof and also a surrounding balcony. All elements I will talk about in this short presentation. The team is a larger team of architects. On the one hand, ifau and Jesko Fezer. We work together on art spaces. We are really interested in appropriation and transformation of spaces, and this is also an interest we transfer to the questions of housing. We all live in the house now today, and we cooperate also with Tim Heide from Heide und von Beckera to as a team of architects, and also together with a project manager who is specialized in co-housing projects. This may be important for the discussion afterwards, how the role of the architects may change, and also how such projects can be developed, and what is the political and institutional framework behind it. The project R50 is situated in the Ritterstraße in Berlin. It's in Kreuzberg, so it's in the center of the city. You can see the building here in between modern housing development. Post-war, the whole area had been destroyed in the war, and there are buildings from several phases of reconstruction of Berlin. The wall is not far from there. So when the wall was down, suddenly this area was at the center of the city again. Before it was, you could say, the fringe of West Berlin. And as Berlin housing is based on rent, most of the time, the city wanted to introduce some spots to install projects based on ownership, interestingly, because this policy has completely changed. But at the time, as we developed the project, there was no programs, there were no subsidies for affordable housing or social housing, you may call it like that. So everything was on the free market, and the city asked for concept-bound competition. So you can enter a concept for a housing project, and they would give you the land and 1 year time to develop a project, and you could acquire the land to a fixed price. So it was out of a bidding process, so you could install quite affordable housing projects. And this opportunity was very interesting for us. And the fact that we wanted to develop a project, this news spread quickly amongst friends. And so we, a core group, developed the project. So we developed it as architects with a participation of future inhabitants, which is for us a very important issue. There's a direct connection, if I may say so, to John Habraken and supports it, especially Jesko, who really did research on John Habraken and published on his works, etc. Introduced this this idea of supports and infill, and we were really inspired by the works of John Habraken while conceiving the architecture, and you could say the support architecture for this house, where we wanted to allow a strong influence of the future inhabitants on the disposition of the spaces and the apartment layouts. The building is shortly on the site. It's put on it's positioned in the middle of the site with a surrounding garden. The garden is in this context relates to all the gardens in the surrounding, to the open fabric, but the house also relates to the street with its facade. And I could talk hours about this context in between modern housing fabric and also the E-bar and all those changes took place in Berlin in the last 60 years. I will spare you this and come to the structure of a house. Tom Frantzen already explained what is important for such a building. It's not an open building, but we wanted to allow different types of negotiation based on the two premises along which we developed the project. One premise was to allow for individualization of the apartment layouts, so to really allow the future inhabitant to create his own apartment, and further on we wanted to allow for transformation of the apartments in the future, and secondly we wanted to allow for a high amount of common spaces. We want from the start we included a high amount of common spaces also in the budget, and we wanted to allow the group of inhabitants to negotiate the disposition and the place where common spaces should be and with which program. So what did we do? We have a central stairwell with a lift in the middle, and we have a surrounding row of columns every 6 meters with a supporting beam, and the floors as such have no further obstructions, so that we can size and resize apartments according to our needs. We have 3 shafts. This is southwest, southeast, and north. We have in the north apartment, we have a light from west and east and north, and the shaft in the middle, and in the other apartments along this wall, so that the position of bathrooms and the toilets and the kitchen is fixed, but the rest of the floor is open. So in our project, you can't move around your toilet as you wish. It is really bound to the shaft. An important element is the surrounding balcony, which creates an equal quality for every room. You can step out of every room, and in a way, it allows really for the negotiation of the apartment layout. Because as we don't fix the balcony, you can really choose where you want to have your living room, your kitchen, etc. So here you can see this was a conceptual drawing at the beginning of our project, where you can see what the fixed parts, like the stairwell and the bathrooms and the kitchen. And you can see that you can furnish it like an apartment, like a loft, and you can also densify it with separate chambers or rooms. And what may be interesting also is that in the beginning we included 25 square meters of common space on every floor. We wanted to do a cooperative. Afterwards, the group decided to change to real ownership, and with this change in the framework, also the disposition of the common room changed. This is the team. This is Jesko, Tim, Christoph. Susanne is not on the picture. This is all a group of people who know each other more or well at that time. Now we're all friends living in one house. I'm saying this not out of romantic reasons, but to say that there is a shared experiential knowledge, and this knowledge allows for what we may call cooperative standards, so that we can create and realize elements which we couldn't with, for instance, a housing company or a developer. And this is a point I really want to stress, because for us as architects, this is a very important driver, that with the user participation, we can really create architectural elements with a very specific quality, and at the same time, for instance, affordable housing, because there is no contradiction with a user and the elements we apply. So this is what we may call the support, the columns and the floor space, and this structure allows for a multitude of relations of different forms of living, of dwelling inside the building. We started with those diagrams. We asked every family to make a diagram on how spaces should relate, and we took these diagrams to for the base of a design of future apartments. And you can see we have 19 different apartments now, which are based on a common standard of constructive elements. So they are, you could say they are same, but different. Spatially, they are completely different, but they're all done in one standard of several ways to construct plasterboard walls, etc. This is one of the apartments. It's Jesko's apartments. You can see the bathrooms here. And you can see the layout. You can see that the layout of the apartment must be quite individual. And here you can see the surrounding balcony, which is very important, as I said, for the negotiation of the individual apartments. You can see the facade, which is moving, and the grille in front, which is not. Here a section. You can see the balcony allowing to step out of every room, and the supporting floor. Just a short stroll through a design process, a diagram of one family, and for a start, and then this 60 centimeter grid loft space, we started to do to test different approaches to the apartment. In this case, they wanted 4 rooms and large living room, and they used what usually would be a corridor space to create a larger living space. This was our answer as architects, putting this into norms and standards and layouts we could handle. In the end, you can see the apartment here above with a large space here, and the kitchen should have been here. And when they moved in, they discovered that the wall was beautiful. They thought it was beautiful, so they decided not to move the kitchen here, but to move it in the back, in the middle of the apartment. These are possibilities, and this goes on with this type of transformation. Another part of the negotiation process of the inhabiting process, which starts in the planning phase, was to find out where to position the common spaces. And this is a party we had in the future common space, where we decided to pool all the 25 square meter spaces we had initially on every floor into one big space, because changing from cooperative to ownership means if anything fails, if, for instance, our common activities would fail, we would lose interest. We would need to sell the space, for instance. So there was a very interesting decision to pool all these 25 square meters into one big space, which we could maybe sell someday. 60 seconds, Susanne?
Yes, about 60 seconds. Perfect.
All right. So what you see here in this axonometric drawing is this big common space, and all the other common spaces, because also the balconies are common spaces in this building. So we had several discussions and on the use of a common space, and there are multiple activities like working, making music, having parties, have a space for guests, and they're all conflicting activities. And we found it very important to have a space which allows for all those activities and uses, but also maintains a certain form of conflict and of continuous negotiation, which keeps the space really alive and puts it into question every day. This is a space in its final stage. And maybe just another hint about planning, the agency of inhabitants. We did the garden only a year after we moved in. It's a continuously changing plan. We're designing it together and changing it together. And just for the end, you can see how the building looks today. This is the entrance. A common room. An apartment with a wooden facade, elements to open up widely. This is a home story from a New Zealand magazine. I don't know. That's why there's this story with a kid moving around. It's Eleanor. The balcony. And that's it.
Thank you so much. Perfect. I think that perfectly explained the building. I think we can move around in it now, and let's move on to Barcelona, and then we can compare these projects in various aspects. So Cristina, I'll give you a 2-minute notice. Does that sound good? Good.
Perfect. So I share my screen. Hello, everyone. So I hope you can see the screen. So I will introduce the case study of the cooperative housing project of La Borda in Barcelona. And basically, this is our first collective housing project. And it was the first cooperative housing developed following the model of right of use on public land in the city of Barcelona. And basically, I think it's really important to contextualize, because it's a project that emerged in a specific moment and in a specific place. So it was basically 2012, so in the middle of the economical crisis in Spain, and also in a city with a huge lack of affordable housing and social housing. Only 1.5% of the housing stock is social housing. So, and also it was the outcome of a neighborhood with a really strong neighborhood association, autonomous movement, and precisely the moment after, a year after, of the Occupy movement, of the popular kind of exhibition of the desire and need for a kind of a political and social change. And in Sants, which is the neighborhood where the project emerged, it was one of the old industrial areas to be transformed, and precisely was the opportunity of the neighborhood to really build a city. It was a paradigmatic experience of a bottom-up transformation of the city in a moment where the municipality was without economical resources, without even, I would say, even ideas to really understand which are the real needs of the neighborhood, because it was a formal plan for a museum of sustainability and other kind of facilities that it were super far from the real needs. So it was an opportunity from the neighborhood to really start the transformation and implementation of a series of projects, of really build a community on that context. And that's why we also like to talk about social accumulation, sometimes even a better understanding or better kind of name, instead of social innovation, that sometimes this kind of projects and new models are also understood in that sense. But I would say that without the economical and social context, without this frame of Can Batlló and the neighborhood, this would not be possible. And basically, from the General Assembly of Can Batlló, I'm thinking for new forms of providing decent and stable and affordable housing. The General Assembly of Laborda, then this co-op emerged, and was following a model that it was present in many other countries. So the General Assembly of the project was learning from Uruguay with the Fugbank model, from Denmark with the Andel model, and many other models that are present in countries all over the world. But the key points were this idea to provide a non-profit model based on collective ownership, where the member of the co-op and the future inhabitant has the right of use one flat for the entire life, so without kind of a time limit. So basically, the collective ownership point was basically a tool to avoid speculation. So when we are talking about Barcelona, where there is such few number of social housing, where the private market is totally controlling the housing stock, it was one of the main values and ideas of the project. So this idea to avoid the speculation, to make affordable and inclusive the housing, and basically through the co-op, it was a community-led project, and basically the project didn't want to become kind of a specific and a unique project. The main idea was to really become a model, so to be replicable and as sustainable as possible, environmental, economically, socially. So understanding sustainability of life in the broadest way possible. And basically, this was a project that took 6 years and a half since the first meetings until when people moved to the project. And it was interesting to understand how the different layers of the development were working in parallel. And it was always a series of discussions and conversations and collaborations between the different kind of stakeholders and agents of the process. So we can see in the upper part, in the organizational development, how the General Assembly was kind of mutating to a more complex structure, including the different technicians from architecture, lawyers, communication, economical, also support. It was a process of intercooperation. Almost all the members, also a cooperative, such Lacol, a cooperative of architects, that were part of this kind of ecosystem that started to develop the legal and financial development of the process as parallel of the architecture. So it was really important for us to really understand how the parameters of the project were specific conditions for the development of the architecture. And basically this project was possible through a collaboration with the municipality. So it was a moment, as I was saying, where there were not financial resources to build social housing led by the administration, the municipality. So it was this kind of co-production of social housing where the municipality made a leasehold of 75 years of a plot to the cooperative, and the cooperative was the responsible of finding the funding, leading the development, building the building, and managing it from all these 75 years. But because it was a public land, also the building was considered social housing. So we had to follow all the principles of social housing, but also all the people involved in the project also had to fulfill the criteria for social housing. That basically was kind of a limit of incomes, and also the people is not able to have any other kind of ownership. And so once the provision of land by the municipality, the second important point was the provision of the funding. So it was really important to understand how this project became part of the social economy network of the city, where two main resources were implemented. Basically, it was the initial down payment of the people, so around 18,500 euros each unit to capitalize the cooperative, and then a loan by a cooperative of financial services, and also emission of titles to the whole social economy and third sector environment that support the project and allow to build it, avoiding the conventional bank, who has been always also investing in the private housing stock and also part of the speculation and the bubble. So with the public land, the social house, the kind of the social economy financial support, and the power and organization of the people, the project arrived to the phase of definition of the architecture. So it was also important to understand in that point kind of the architecture of the participation. So basically, it was the total control of the development by the users, taking the decisions of all the vectors and areas. When we arrive to architecture, we start a co-design process, a participatory process, really active to define the values, sets, and conditions of the project, and also arriving to a moment where the users started to define specific decisions inside the units that I will talk. But understanding how control it was kind of being more concrete while we defined the project was something really important, and also something that as part of all the methodologies, in the sense that how we acknowledge the people, understanding the architecture, the language, the drawing, the models, the space to take decisions. But it was also important to understand that the user, the involvement of the user, and the knowledge that they gave us, it was essential to reconsider the standards of housing, the conventional image of the provision of collective housing is focused to a specific kind of family or heterosexual family, and understanding the diversity of needs, but also this series of conversations really allows us to challenge standards, regulations, and to really have discussions that even had an outcome as part of changing regulations of the city. So it was key to have the user on board in the whole process of architecture, and at the same time, the idea to discuss about the conviviality, the housing program, but all in a framework of understanding that you are not owner of a flat, of a unit. So this idea that we had to create an open infrastructure, kind of a support, resilient to the life of the community, the different needs through time, but at the same time adaptable and with specific kind of rules and protocols that allowed adaptability and even movements and exchange through time. And of course, this idea of sustainability, comfort, and affordability as a key points of the project to reduce the cost during the lifespan, also in terms of the cost of energy, for example, but of course, the cost of the construction. And so a series of methodologies allows us to really understand this radiography of the community that give us this key information to challenge, for example, the parking regulations, but also in this process of understanding the user and set these values and frameworks of the project, discussions about sustainability, how we define the goals of the project that basically were key to define the energy strategy and also the material strategy. So this idea of a passive building that it's led and controlled by an active user. So the main strategy of the building, densifying the south facade, generating a courtyard that became energy saver, and all this with this kind of transition from the common space, so from the public space to the common areas in the ground floor with a public passage to the most private units in the upper floors. So it was a combination of the community model and the energy model, and with a section with this kind of unbalanced section where we can see how we densify the south facade to put as much units as possible, and also how all these thresholds and kind of in-between spaces became energy devices, but also spaces of interaction of the community.
Cristina, you have 2 minutes left.
Exactly, great. And basically, so all this transition from the public to the interior, to the kind of common areas in the different levels of the building, arriving to the common spaces, that basically the second step was this discussion about the common areas and how these common spaces allow to imagine new forms of conviviality that had an impact in terms of gender distribution of the household, but also in terms of economical and environmental aspects. But what it was even more important, it was how this also was defining a redistribution of the area of the unit. And this was key to start imagining how the matrix, how the scheme and system to define the units. And basically it was through a matrix of non-hierarchical spaces that can be kind of connected and organized in different typologies, that something that can change through time through a structure that were interconnected, allowing just kind of with light divisions to define the size and type and characteristic of typologies, and the layers that we were adding to this CLT structure was basically the installation, kitchen and bathroom, and also allocating outside the unit all the heating meters and all the systems to facilitate the maintenance and the exchange of the site. So it was this idea of the infrastructure, the set of options with the position of the kitchen and the entrance to the bathroom, and the lighters divisions based on the user needs. So it was also important to define a protocol and a manual to really understand how to intervene, to make easy to be removable and to change in the future for future inhabitants. And basically this was this kind of naked infrastructure to be transformed for the user with really simple materials and solutions, and also to reduce the cost, this idea of phases of construction with a second phase for all the common areas to be transformed in the future, at the same time that all the activities started to be developed, realizing about the impacts of all these activities in the building. And I think that we can just discuss this later, but basically the Laborde became one pioneer project as a policy in Barcelona that was promoting new cooperative housing, also the emergence of new stakeholders, and also the replicability of it outside Barcelona in all Catalonia. So that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cristina. Fantastic. I'm going to hand off. We're just going to keep going. I'm going to hand off to Juliane Greb, and we'll hear about the most recent project in Munich.
Yeah. Hello. Okay. So I hope you can see my screen now.
Yes, it works, and we can hear you.
Great. Yeah, I'm going to present the project San Remo, which is the first residential project for the Kooperative Großstadt, a housing cooperative that was founded in 2015 in Munich, one of the, or I think it's the most expensive city or place to live in Germany. And the cooperative was founded actually by a group of architects that were unsatisfied with the quality of new housing being produced in Munich, but also, of course, of the lack of affordability of housing in Munich. And yeah, they gathered a group of members, future residents, and bought a plot in München-Riem, and that's an area that's, well, it's only 20 minutes from the central station, but still it has a bit of a suburban feeling. It is right next to the trade fair in Munich, and the whole area is has been developed within the last 20 years on a plot of which has formerly been an airport, and it's quite homogeneous. Housing is quite dominant even on the ground floors, and other functions like commercial functions or community functions are like bundled in one place. So it's it has not a very urban feeling, also because of a lack of density. What the cooperative did was they formulated a quite ambitious brief for the project. So they wanted to activate the area and also implement partly experimental forms of housing. And they wanted to launch an open competition with the jury of known architects, and yeah, it should be open for everyone, no matter what size of office, which is quite unique in Germany. This open public competition took place, and my partner Patrick and me took part together with Florian Sommer and Anne Femmer from Sommer & Femmer Architekten from Leipzig, and we were lucky that our project got selected to be realized. So a year later, here you see the group of residents digging in some good wishes before the foundation being poured. Oops, and here you see the project today it's situated on a corner, and I'm not going to talk a lot about the facade, but what we tried to do was to create a also towards the neighborhood a recognizable place, and to have many moments of transition between the street and the interior. And here on the west facade, there is a big winter garden, which kind of shows a bit the appropriation of the residents on the upper floors, and also big windows on the ground floor. This is the ground floor plan. So here you see the corner, and so the gray area that was the big windows that you saw in the picture before is a space that's rented out currently to a youth organization doing youth work in the area. And the green-blue area on the plan, that's all common space, collective space for the residents, also with a back door where the neighboring cooperative can enter. And that space can be freely programmed by the residents. This is some sketches we did during the process of design, where we had several moments getting together with the residents, discussing the use of the ground floor. And this is how it looks today. So you enter into this big hall, which can be divided with these curtains, and there can be different activities taking place, like children playing or washing laundry. And there's a little workshop, wood workshop, as you can see here on the left, and a kitchen towards the street, where the neighbors can stroll in. Here you can see with good weather, it works quite well as a mediator with the neighborhood. And also there's a connection, as a maximum connection to the backyard, which is also partly shared with the neighboring collective, as you can see here. Now I'm going to move on to the upper floor. So through this big hall, you also enter the upper floors where the apartments are situated. And for the apartments, the cooperative had in mind to have different types of apartments. They wanted a type of apartment that could grow and shrink. Another type where you could share spaces with a neighboring apartment, and basic apartments. And what we did was we actually just designed one structure that could take on any kind of these housing forms, because we thought, okay, there is a group of residents, but maybe in the future the number of people that want to share spaces will change. So we thought it was a more sustainable approach to just design a structure that could take on all these different forms. And also we were asking ourselves the question, what is basic living actually now today? As we all live in so many different ways, and with designing this structure, we wanted to overcome still today quite dominant typical custom floor plan for the nuclear family, and didn't want to design something that is fit to a specific certain social model. And as you can see in this scheme, there's a number of cores that defines the number of apartments, and the core is always the kitchen, from which a possible number of rooms can be accessed. And the possible rooms, they're at the facade side, and the bathrooms, they're also connected to the kitchen. So there's basically no hierarchy in the plan. And the possible rooms along the facade, they're all about 14 square meters. So they're neutral in use, and they're interconnectable as well. because these divisions here, as you can see, they're just dotted lines. Here you can see the entrance from the staircase into the kitchen. I will show more pictures later, but first an image also from the competition still, the central kitchen. And the idea was that then, yeah, the residents could choose themselves. Do they want to maximize individual rooms in a shared flat situation, for instance, or or do they want apartments that where the living spaces are on both facades, or do they want to share spaces with adjacent apartments? Or they switch rooms between apartments. So here, these little arrows, this is also executed like this. And here you can see like a shared space that you would enter from the staircase. And from this shared space, you could enter into the adjacent apartments. And the apartments can also switch rooms between each other. So what we designed initially was actually basically this this construction plan, and all the so on the grid there's these prefabricated beams that kind of mark the possible plan on the ceiling in the spaces. And all the light infill walls, they were actually decided by, so here you can see again this system of the beams and the infill walls underneath. So the beams have a certain height, so you would also don't need like a door lintel above. And here on the right is the central space where the kitchen would come, and where the bathroom is connected right to. And yeah, all the light walls were then decided by the cooperative themselves. So this was the first participation session where they decided the extent of every apartment. So this was a negotiation process, who would move in on which floor and how many of these possible rooms would they get. And the outcome was a number of different types of apartments. Looked a bit like this, and this grayish little extensions here. Those were the so-called stairwell rooms that would be shared with the adjacent apartments, so with 3 or 4 units. So that's spaces that are not thought to be for everyone in the house, but more as an extension of the private apartment, and then you have a collective part together with 3 or 4 other units. And this was again some sketches from the process which we shared with the residents, convincing them of the possibilities that this would offer for them. And this is one photo today. Well, I think in many of these cases, it took quite some testing out how to use or furnish them. And this is another one. So here on the left, you see door to the apartment. The black door is always to the staircase. And then you can see here the smaller apartments. They can even open up like double doors towards these spaces. So it really becomes like an extension of their own apartment. And then in a second participation round, the residents, they could, so everyone got like a blank plan of their unit with the grid on, of course, and they could decide themselves where where the infill walls would be on the grid and where doors or sliding doors or double doors would be, so they could determine how open or closed their plan would be. And they got back to us with this cutout sheets, which turned out quite differently. This is some impressions.
You have about 2 minutes to conclude.
Some impressions how it looks today. So here you're standing in the kitchen of an apartment, and you see this very direct connection to the collective and communal spaces, which I think is a big quality, as it really enhances a chance of informal contact with your neighbors. Here again, an apartment opened up to a collective space. This is another kitchen of one of the bigger apartments. You see that people are also struggling a little to combine their entrance situation with the kitchen. And then you can see that it's always the same 14 square meter room used as a kids' room. This was an eating space or a small living room if one wants to, which then maybe gives you the opportunity to have an extra office. Here you can see the more spacious setup where two of the spaces are connected, or even more, with a central kitchen and the view onto the winter garden. It's like a small additional layer we added on the west facade, as there is quite some noise from the trade fair traffic. But that is thought, just like a little possibility to step outside and more as a buffer. And then on the top, on the roof terrace, there's a more collective, bigger outdoor space where people can grow vegetables and get together. That's it, actually.
Thank you, Juliane. Perfect timing. Can the whole panel turn their cameras on? So fantastic grouping. So compliments to Cassim for this combination of projects. And I'm happy to facilitate a conversation and just a few comments. I think what's striking is what all three projects brought forward, the seminal role of architects in being not just architects, but actually initiating certain initiatives or responding to certain calls. So in Munich, having the cooperative, which was a client for this project, actually being founded by architects. Similarly, in Barcelona, I think the role of architects in Lacol has been much broader than designing buildings, but organizing and interacting with the municipality. And in Berlin, interestingly, many of the architects were also very active politically, but they responded to a government program. So I think that's one thing. Also, one thing that was striking and doesn't really touch on the topic of our panel, only indirectly, is the role of the competition. So these different kinds of processes by which a client or a municipality actually issues calls for ideas for a piece of land, like in the case of Berlin, and how people can respond, or balancing what is considered as participatory and resident control, right? How much do residents have to say and how much do professionals actually have to say? And I think all three projects are very interesting in how they link that in different ways, right? It's not the residents actually aren't designing the buildings. They get to respond to the building. The architects respond to the architect, to the residents, and so on. So those are just 2 points. So just as a reminder, the panel is about the question, what can resident control enable politically? So I'd love to have all of you reflect on this question. And Cristina started thinking about this, how an individual project that came out of a specific political context in turn has influenced ongoing policies. Christoph, I think you mentioned your project came out of a very particular moment, which has long gone, where the city was willing to give away land to market rate, home ownership development, no strings attached, right? You're not a nonprofit cooperative, you're a condominium association. You can sell your apartment at whatever you can sell it as. Lacol has an income restriction. I'm not sure what it is in Munich exactly, what the terms are, i.e. that the municipality allowed some things through financial or land access. The developers responded, and now you have these projects which are 10 years old, some are only 2 years old. Could you each just say something as to how your projects have influenced broader policies, both in the particular municipality or city or broader? Again, Cristina, you were showing other municipalities in Barcelona. So maybe we go backwards. So maybe Juliana, you start, then Cristina, and then Christoph. So what's the political learning from? And I sort of what has come of this?
I think it maybe still partly also has to come, but I mean, I think, that the project and the success of the project for sure has drawn attention to this, to the value of collective ownership and the value of an open competition. And at the same time, I think the discussion with the municipality about rules and regulations were interesting, and because Sanremo is not, well, there is an income restriction but it's not, the project itself is completely privately financed. It was just the ground that was subsidized by the city, and because of that we had to fulfill certain rules applying that also apply for social housing, but we didn't have to follow them super strictly, but we had to discuss everything with the city, and there came forward a lot of things that are actually contrary with our project, and we also completely got aware of how dominant and how custom fitted these rules are to the nuclear family, like a way of living that's actually totally outdated today. So I think the visibility of the project has maybe also contributed the discussion around that, and I hope that will. I also been looking into this topic recently, and I've seen small changes in certain federal states in Germany, that the regulations also acknowledge that shared spaces have a quality and can mean also affordable and or making things more affordable while having more quality. And I think that's still a long way to go, but projects like this definitely, I think, contribute to that discussion.
Great. So just to summarize, you'd say so far in the few years, the visibility has enabled a discussion about adapting regulations to allow for more flexibility of use of funds or dimensions, or as you said, that a shared space is considered a necessary part of living spaces.
Yes, and also, for instance, these shared spaces between the apartments, they couldn't be counted in the regulation. There was no term for that, and also the room sizes, to have these neutral room sizes, like in the regulations, they tell you there has to be a kid's room, there has to be a grown-up room, and also the number of rooms is linked to the number of people and the number of square meters, which, if you draw it up, you just come out with the type floor plan, for a small family. So all these, and all these buffer spaces also, that you're supposed to have a hallway. And I think this issue of privacy, also that a more direct connection between collective and private spaces has a quality. And I think, yeah, like privacy is also an issue that is a bit emphasized in rules and regulations, and it is not very much talked about. That also comes at a cost of a connection with your neighbors. And yeah, no, I'm drifting off a bit, sorry.
No, that's great. I'm trying to navigate questions coming in, but maybe we'll go through my question.
Yeah.
So, Cristina, how would you characterize the sort of broader political impact of your work?
I think that I mentioned already in the presentation that in the case of Laborda, it was kind of a first agreement, kind of a pilot project. But after Laborda, where also it was more demand of people interested and more communities starting to wanted to develop new projects. So it was a series of competitions for land to be developed for cooperatives. So nowadays cooperative housing is included and implemented as one of the lines of the municipality to provide affordable housing. But also something very interesting is at the end that Barcelona, it's kind of the capital of the region of Catalonia. So it's many of the cities are always looking to Barcelona, and also even in Spain. So it started many discussions, even more competitions in other areas. And this was in terms of the housing policy, but I think that also, as Juliane was mentioning, with Laborda, we were in a way challenging and also having a lot of conversation with the housing agency about the whole regulation was defined, also how common areas, how surfaces, and I think all these also had, and with a new housing regulation that includes common areas, as well also of regulations regarding the parking obligation. So I think it was interesting how this was opening many discussions between different areas of the municipality and the housing, even energy agency. And also it was interesting how the cooperative housing has been also understood in relation with certain other social, even urban challenges, such as aging population. For example, in the housing regulation, it's also a way to understand how cooperatives are spaces of distributing care, of social support. And 1 year after people started to live in Laborda, arrived COVID. So it was also interesting to see how Laborda was performing during COVID times. So I think that there was a series of conversations in parallel, also about energy management, and also Laborda has contributed to create an energy community. And I think that there are basically spaces of discussions from the community also to outside and in the other way around, that in many layers had an impact in terms of the city and the context.
Thank you. I'm going to pass on to Christoph.
Yeah, Susanne, I think the question you're asking is very complicated, because you're asking about transferability of maybe models you're asking about learning from, and
I'm talking just about Berlin, though. I'm not yet transferring.
Yeah,
elsewhere.
but we had. Let's say Berlin as a city is a special city, and you could say that this program, which initiated our projects, was as I said, or tried to explain, procedures which are concept bound. So it's a kind of competition you apply with a concept, and there was a small window where this kind of urban production could have become a real player in the city, which is not the case. The city didn't recognize really the potential, I think, of this kind of development, and this is I think, always the same issue or the same questions we are asking. The city had to produce more housing, also affordable housing. So the usual response to that is to go into standards, as Juliane already said, to produce a kind of mass housing based on standard answers to very specific questions. And on the other hand, the projects we made, like Ritterstraße, and afterwards a project at Blumengroßmarkt, which is about 4 times the size of Ritterstraße, incorporating also cooperative apartments. And again, there was no background of subsidies or affordable housing. So we produced something the city should have produced, for instance, places for work and apartments at a fixed rent, etc. The city was very proud of those projects. We got prizes, prize for urbanism, etc. But in fact, they weren't able to really apply this process in a broader sense. So to make it a player in the production of affordable housing, for instance. So and there's a difference to cities like Hamburg, where it's done, or Tübingen. And what I think is interesting, and that's what I meant when I was talking about cooperative standards, is that there is no contradiction to specialize things if people are responsible. If you take housing and dwelling as an act, and you allow for responsibility, you will be able to provide very specific buildings and situations which are in no contradiction to the production of affordable housing on a base of standards. And the thing, one thing you can learn from those processes is that if you look at the process like Ritterstraße or Blumengroßmarkt, afterwards you would say, it's a super complex project and we need to do this, that, and that. You will find 100 things you will have to provide to make such a project happen. But in reality, you start with maybe 2 premises, like as you say, okay, we want to a building which allows for negotiations. So this is a crucial question for the design. You have to provide a well-designed architectural structure which allows for a certain flexibility, and it's based on a standard. And then there is another premise. You say we want to share spaces as an extension to our apartments, and from that you start designing with the people who will inhabit the house, and they will take over the responsibility for certain elements like the balcony where it's raining through, or a common space where we don't know if we're really going to use it or if we will have to sell it. They can really support this kind of project. And what is not understood is that you start with very simple premises, and I think what should be enabled is to start with a group of people who share the same knowledge. In our case, naturally, it's academics, they're green, they're interested in sustainable building, But the interesting thing is they share the same knowledge, so they are able to make experiments, for instance, because they know they can control it. And that's maybe one thing which is interesting in Germany. We are discussing something which is called Gebäudeklasse E. It means there are classes of types of buildings you can make. And this Gebäudeklasse E means experimental building. And there is this discussion that maybe you can allow for certain experiments in building if the people who are building the building with the architects are really, if it's secured that they know what is going to be the experiment. I don't know, my English is bad, but maybe you can explain.
No, it's fine. I mean, it will be a new regulatory class of building, right?
Yes.
So a new building type.
It exactly goes into this question. If an experiments can be realized if a certain agreement and a certain communication is established between the housing companies and the architects and all parties. So this is something I think there is a learning from those projects, which may have an impact on regulations and standards.
Right. I think those responses were very interesting, and the last one ties into some questions that have come in from Pamela Scheiman, who's asking about the longer term perspective of these buildings, specifically what provisions are made for maintenance. I'm assuming maintenance includes also investment, right? Not just maintenance, cleaning the staircase, but okay, at some point you need a new roof, at some point you need a new boiler. How is that planned? What are the rules for handing on, let's say, inheritance in the cooperatives in both in Barcelona and in Munich? That would be interesting. Like, can those apartments be given to your children or not? I'm translating the question now. So I think it'd be interesting to reflect on that. There was another set of questions about transferability. I'm just going to say that this is probably the big elephant in the room, which I would encourage all of the listeners to have to figure out themselves. As we heard, even between Berlin and Munich, there are huge differences in terms of how the politics work and how the city government responds to certain projects and what they seem to understand or not, what political pressures they're under, essentially. So when I hear you, Christoph, talk about, well, we need people who, have a shared knowledge, in many cases, and probably including Berlin, that's precisely the political no-go, because the pressure is to include all kinds of people. You have to serve everyone. You cannot just serve, people who are already best friends and who all went through the same school, right? So there's a lot of political pressures on municipalities and developers to happen. But so maybe if you could all just respond briefly, and I think our time is, I'm going to rely on Cassim to tell us when our time is really up. But what are, very pragmatically, what are the rules your three projects have set in place in terms of longer term maintenance, longer term sustainability? Also, we've seen flexibility, but basically the flexibility came at the beginning, right? So there was a certain apartment layout. What happens to the next people? Are they going to tear everything out, or you just leave it up to them? Or how does that get negotiated? So maybe just now in reverse order again, maybe starting with Christoph, since also your project has actually been lived in for 10 years.
Yes.
How are these changes negotiated?
So there are some provisions who are made with the construction, with the support structure. So there is no supporting walls on the floors. So you can resize the apartments, and the plasterboard walls, you can take them out and change them, which it has happened sometimes up to now, and will happen more often now because the children move out, so the apartments become so big, etc. So that's one thing already. Tom Frantzen already showed a lot of these possibilities. Another interesting thing, maintenance and care is something which is very interesting. For instance, for this surrounding balcony, this scaffolding, this permanent scaffolding, allows us to not only to have a wooden facade and which needs care, but it also allows us to repair things or to correct things we did not well as architects, maybe, or something. So there is this maintenance aspect which is very important, and this element provides has the capacity for this kind of maintenance, and this is also has an impact on the costs, on the permanent costs we have with a building. Transformability has been a very important issue for us, and there is also in the common room. There was also this idea of having a self-build process to enable a self-build process, and again there are certain details which allow the self-construction with wood we're discussing at the moment, because we want to change and have more space for guests. Again,
Christoph, I'm going to have to, I'm getting signals that we have only a few minutes left. So okay. I'm going to have to cut you short on the details, although they're of course very interesting. Maybe just briefly. So maintenance and inheritance.
Yeah, just the as it is a project which is based on ownership, we have everybody can sell their apartments, but we did one thing again with the surrounding balconies. I mentioned it. It's in common ownership. That means that that was the only thing we could do, because there is no ethic background, like, as you may have in a cooperative. But this common ownership means if somebody buys the apartment, he has to deal with the fact that everybody could walk in front of his windows, which is not happening, of course, but this is also a way of dealing with this question of to maintain the initial goals these projects have.
Great, thank you. Cristina.
I think that in the case of La Borda, it's a collective ownership. So something that we were discussing, so the housing co-op was discussing a lot, is this idea of it's have sense or not to inherit, and precisely to break with the conception of individual ownership. This is not allowed in the cooperative. So you have the right to use it for your entire life. And if someone is living in the unit, in the sense that, for example, if there are the son or daughter of someone who received the first contract living there, they can remain living there, but not if someone is not living and suddenly when the flat is empty. So there is no right to inherit. There is a right to secure the people who is living there. And when a flat, when someone left the cooperative it's the one who decides who is going to live there. And I think this was something really important in the negotiation with the municipality, but also nowadays where has been changes also to understand which kind of criteria we define to make inclusive this kind of project, because it was something that we have been discussing a lot, that because of the network, because of the economical effort, because of even the involvement of the process, sometimes could be exclusive. And cooperative housing sector is really working on that issue. And in terms of maintenance, there is a committee, a working group who is kind of defining certain kind of tasks done by the users. But then, of course, in the funding structure has been a provision of payments in the future to deal with all these issues, in order to make it affordable always and not suddenly have to pay to the roof, for example, not to really plan everything.
I'm seeing, thank you, Cristina.
We have a few more seconds. Juliana, you get the last word. Can you?
On Remo, it works quite similar to La Borda, I would say. Lacol, yeah. So, like Cristina explained, it's rented apartments. You can live there for as long as you want, but you cannot, give it to someone after you. But the cooperative, rents it out to the next resident.
Awesome.
Fantastic. Thank you all. Thank you also for the questions from the audience. I'm handing back to Cassim. Cassim, please.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. This was really fascinating, and there were a lot of questions we didn't get to. And thank you, Susanne, for your excellent moderation. I can't think of anyone better who understands some of the intricacies and nuances of these things. And we will get a chance to think about some of the trickiness of replicability and transferability across different geographies and scales in our very final reflection session towards the end of the afternoon or evening. But I'm going to thank you guys so much for sharing these projects from Europe. And now we're going to look at some projects originating in very different contexts in the US and in China.